Have you ever thought a passing sentence could change the fate of an empire? A seemingly joking challenge, "If you can open this safe, I will marry you," sets off a chain of events that reveals secrets buried for years. At night in New York, the lights from the towers pierce the clouds like shooting stars. In a 50-story penthouse in a glass-enclosed conference room, a young female CEO has just been pushed to the limit. Pressure from the board of directors, a takeover deal hanging over her, her father's legacy on the brink. And in that exhaustion, she turns to someone no one would have thought would be the central character of the game, a night shift janitor who quietly dusts the floors. She throws out a challenge. He responds with silence. And from that moment, the gears of fate begin to turn. This is not just a story about a safe. It's about the secrets of the past, about a genius wife who died in a fire, about an ambitious father, and about a father's love for his little daughter. More importantly, it's the story of how an invisible man stepped into the light, confronted the powerful, and rewrote the entire rules of the game. Stay tuned until the end, because I promise what you're about to hear will keep you on the edge of your seat. New York at night never knows rest. From 50 stories up, Madison Lane looks down through the glass wall, where the lines of cars like yellow fireflies tirelessly drift along Fifth Avenue. The atmosphere in her office has no street sounds, only the sound of wind hitting the glass and the click of high heels on the polished concrete floor, sounding like the heartbeat of a person being oppressed. The penthouse suite was cold and modern, everything brutally minimalist. A long walnut table, Italian leather chairs, LED screens hooked up to a global data network. But there was one outlier, a giant safe, its body black and shiny, its hinges brass standing like a memorial in the corner. It did not belong to the world of glass and data. It came from another time, a time when her father, the founder of Lane Dynamics, believed that ambition and power could be locked up in a metal machine. Madison had spent the entire day being tortured by the board's sarcasm. Leonard Crane, the chairman with the sharp eyes and sharp smile, had said bluntly, "If you don't have a new strategy by Friday, we'll let Titan Industrial swallow you up." In other words, she would become the female CEO who lost her father's empire. Madison hated feeling slighted, but she hated the sight of that safe even more. For months, she called in teams of engineers from Berlin to Tokyo, all to no avail. The iron door stood tauntingly, refusing to open, as if to say, "You're not up to the task of inheriting your father's secret." In her frustration, Madison turned to him and said, half jokingly, half self-relief, "If you can open this safe, I'll marry you." She hadn't expected a response. Even less had she expected the person to hear it to be Ben Carter, the night janitor, who was bent over dusting the base of the safe. He wore a faded dark blue uniform, thin rubber gloves, short hair, and a sturdy build. An invisible figure to everyone. A third-shift worker who only appeared when the office was asleep. But tonight he stood next to the company's greatest legacy, as if by fate. "Did you hear that?" Madison asked, her voice tinged with anger and exhaustion. Ben looked up. His brown eyes made her pause for a moment. They weren't the gaze of a subordinate, no timidity, no meanness. They were quiet but deep, as if they contained a world of their own. He stood slowly, still holding the rag in his hand. "I heard that, Miss Lane," he said, his voice low, clear, and unshaken, But a lock like this doesn't open on challenge. It opens when someone understands it. In that moment, the space froze. The neon light fell on two people. One was the young CEO who was pinned against the wall. The other was the anonymous janitor who had just challenged authority. Madison sneered, her smile unhappy. "You're an expert on antique safes? Okay, clean it up. Maybe tomorrow I'll hire the museum to come get it." Ben didn't reply. He just folded the towel neatly, his movements calm to the point of defiance. Then he bent down and continued wiping, as if the conversation had never happened. Madison turned away, walking quickly back to her desk, her heart pounding. She felt annoyed at being corrected by a cleaning staff, but strangely, something like curiosity lingered in her heart. At the same time, the clock struck 10 at night. Madison left the office, entered the private elevator, leaving the space silent. But when the light of her heels disappeared behind the steel door, the room did not fall completely asleep. Ben stopped. He looked at the safe for a long time, not with the eyes of a cleaning staff, but with the eyes of someone who had known life inside steel. Something both challenging and familiar. He placed his bare hand on the cold steel, closed his eyes. Take a deep breath. The building seemed to stop breathing. The sound of the fan stopped. Only his heart beat in his chest. "Every lock has a heartbeat," Ava had said. Ava, his late wife, the brilliant engineer with whom he had shared the language of machines. She had died in a fire 5 years ago, a fire the press had called a little accident. But for Ben, it was the day the world fell apart. In that moment, he heard a faint murmur from inside the safe, the sound of metal expanding, the sound of screws sighing after decades of silence. It was telling its own story, he knew. A language that only those patient enough, sensitive enough, could hear. Ben opened his eyes. They were red. He withdrew his hand, wiped another line of dust, and left silently, leaving the room as it was. The safe was still there, untouched, but it had someone listening. And fate, from that moment on, the gears had begun to turn. Madison returned to the office the next morning. She was busy with a packed schedule, briefings, signing contracts, dealing with the media. Assistant Ian hurried in, hot coffee in hand, reading a list of problems. Titan Industrial accelerates deal. Forbes asks about Q3 numbers. Board demands immediate resolution, but Madison wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, right next to the safe. There in the shadows lay a folded napkin. She picked it up. There were no words, no names, just a surprisingly detailed mechanical drawing, a sidebar with a serrated edge. A tiny arrow pointed to the only deviation, next to the number 0.0202 millimeters. She was stunned. The 6-figure engineers, along with the laser scanner, had missed the deviation, and the cleaning man had seen it with his fingers and ears. In that moment, Madison knew the challenge from last night had been no joke. It was an invitation to a maze, a place where the safe held not only files, but a secret that would change everything. The next morning, Manhattan was as bustling as ever, but the 50th floor of Lane Dynamics was silent, save for the click of Madison's high heels on the cold concrete. Ian, her assistant, hurried after her, a steaming cappuccino in his hand, rattling off a list of new crises. Titan Industrial had issued an ultimatum. Forbes was demanding answers on Q3 numbers. The board wanted an emergency meeting at the end of the week. But this time Madison barely heard anything. As soon as she entered the room, her eyes were drawn to a small but out-of-place detail, a folded paper napkin in the shadow of the safe. In the usually sterile room, its presence felt like a deliberate message. She paused, signaling Ian to be quiet. Slowly, she bent down and picked up the paper. When she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. It was no random scribble. It was a mechanical drawing, incredibly detailed. Concentric circles, technical symbols, a sidebar with intricate serrations. And right next to it, a tiny arrow pointing to a discrepancy with a number 0.0202 millimeters. A microscopic error, smaller than a hair. Something her expensive team of engineers with their state-of-the-art laser scanners had completely missed. Madison held her breath as she stared at the tissue. Something cheap, seemingly useless, but it held the answer the Empire craved. Who made this? She looked up at the safe. It still stood there, silent, a defiant block of metal. But in that moment, it was no longer inanimate. It seemed to smile, mocking her. "You are not the only one who sees me." Madison clenched the paper in her hand. Ben Carter's calm brown eyes from last night flashed through her mind. The way he'd stood up and calmly told her that locks only open to those who understand them still made her shiver. At the time, she'd taken it as the arrogance of an unknown janitor. But now, when she held the blueprint in her hands, she had to face another truth. Maybe he was right. She ordered Ian to get the man's file, and when the thin file was placed before her, the feeling of claustrophobia grew. Just a few sketchy lines: warehouse worker, maintenance worker, janitor. No qualifications, no achievements, nothing. Too clean to the point of insincerity. Madison frowned. People were never so empty, unless they were deliberately hiding it. She put the blueprint down on the table and sat silently for a moment. The feeling of wounded pride pricked her heart like a thorn. For years, she had fought to prove herself worthy of the CEO chair, facing the board of experienced people, enduring the skeptical gaze of just my father's daughter. Now, a man mopping the floor silently pointed out what her entire engineering team had failed to do. It was humiliating, but also a challenge. Instead of calling him in to question her, Madison chose another way. If he had left a message, she would have responded with a question. She went to the old wooden bookcase and pulled out Fletcher's treatise on lever and tumbler mechanisms, a rare book her father had once admired. Turning to the chapter on the Cerberus lock, the most complex of all, she placed the book open next to the safe. On it, she deliberately left a can of window cleaner and a towel, as if a janitor had just been interrupted. A trap, a signal. Night had fallen. Manhattan was bright outside, and the 50th floor was as silent as a tomb. Ben Carter pushed the familiar cart into the room. With a glance, he saw the Fletcher book wide open. His feet stopped. He knew this was no accident. This was a call. He stood before the safe, the yellow light falling on his pensive face. Memories flooded back in waves. Ava, his wife, the woman who had sat for hours over her sketches, her eyes glowing as she spoke of Cerberus as if it had a soul. "Every lock breathes, Ben," she had whispered. "Just listen." Now the memory made his hands tremble slightly. He could ignore it, pretend he hadn't seen it, but he couldn't. The nostalgia, the urge, the buried pride made him sit down. He pulled a pair of thin pliers from the toolbox, then reached into the wastebasket and pulled out a paper clip. In his strong hands, the paperclip transformed. 10 minutes, each crease, each grind, all slow, precise, as if he had done it 1,000 times. When he was done, he no longer had a paperclip. It was a lockpick, tiny, delicate, impossibly precise. Ben placed it on the right page of Fletcher, right in the middle of the Cerberus illustration. A metal exclamation point, an answer. Then he folded the toolbox, wheeled the cart out of the room, and disappeared into the darkness as if it had never been there. The next morning, when Madison entered the room, she saw the tool lying quietly on the page. The sunlight filtered through the glass, making it glint like a sliver of silver. She picked it up and turned it in her hand, feeling the folds too precise to be accidental, the grooves that fit her fingers perfectly. There was no doubt, this was the work of a master craftsman. A slow smile spread across Madison's lips. In that brightly lit room, she shivered for the first time. She had entered an invisible chess game, and her opponent, or perhaps ally, was none other than the man who silently pushed the mop cart every night. The safe remained silent, revealing no secrets. But Madison understood that another door had opened. Not an iron door, but a door connecting two destinies, two seemingly strange worlds. And from this moment, the real game had begun. The room on the 50th floor was still filled with morning light, but inside Madison, darkness had managed to creep in. The paperclip tool was still on the table, glittering like an affirmation. The person she thought was invisible had stepped out of the darkness, leaving a clear trace. She sat there, fingering the small object, and for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope arose. If Ben really had the ability, he might be the key to opening the safe. And inside the safe, there were more than just memories of her father. Madison was sure it held files that could turn the tide against Titan Industrial. Before her hope could take shape, the heavy wooden door to the office swung open without knocking. Leonard Crane entered, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and a distinctive smirk. The man was in his 50s, but his hair was slicked back with salt and pepper, and his Savile Row pinstripe suit hugged his still-toned body. He exuded a cold power that didn't need to be proven, just imposed. "Still here with that old safe, Madison?" Leonard's voice rang out soft and sarcastic. His gaze swept over the objects in the room and stopped at the safe where Madison had tucked the paperclip tool into a drawer. "Don't tell me you still believe it holds magic." Madison raised her head, her smile cold. "Sometimes, Leonard, the old things are the foundation for the future." "My father left it for a reason," Leonard sneered, stepping closer to the glass window. He crossed his arms, looking down at the car license plate below as if the entire city were his own chessboard. The only reason is that he didn't want to admit defeat. And now that legacy hangs over you, blinding you. Meanwhile, Titan Industrial has set the board. They've submitted a takeover offer, and the board will approve it this Friday. Unless... He turned back, his silver-gray eyes flashing like knives. "Unless you come up with a strategy strong enough to stop it. But looking around your office, all I see is a silent safe and stubbornness." The air sagged. Madison felt Leonard's every word like a hammer hitting her will. He didn't just press her, he wanted her to admit her helplessness. "The documents in this safe," Madison tried to keep her voice calm, "could be the legal weapon to stop Titan." "Stop Titan?" Leonard laughed, a loud mocking bell ringing. "Madison, don't make a fool of yourself. That safe has tested dozens of experts. No one can open it. Do you think you can figure it out in 3 days? Don't forget, I have enough power of attorney to end the game. And when I sell, you will become the youngest female CEO in America. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only Madison could hear. You're not like your father. He was a founder. You're just a stubborn heiress. Knowing when to quit, that's the art of power. Then Leonard left, leaving the door slammed and the silence thick. Madison sat motionless. His words pounded through her head like knives. She remembered the arrogant stares of the council, the relentless calls from the media, and the image of her father, a once invincible man now reduced to memory and a silent safe. She reached into a drawer and pulled out the paperclip. Small, simple, but proof that the impossible could be challenged. Madison took a deep breath. No, she wouldn't give up. If Leonard wanted to push her into a corner, she would find a way to break through. And the only key now was Ben Carter. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ben wheeled a wheelchair back to his small apartment in Queens. The apartment was only 150 square feet, but clean and tidy. The living room was filled with childlike colors, wallpaper, misshapen suns, lopsided kittens drawn by childish hands. Draw. In the corner of the sofa, little Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, sat hugging her knees, breathing lightly next to a small ventilator emitting a steady hum. "Daddy's home," she cried, then coughed, quickly grabbing the inhaler. Ben sat down next to her, stroking her hair, his eyes softening after a stressful day. "Did Daddy bring you anything?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. Ben smiled. He took out a small, smooth stone from his pocket, picked up from the sidewalk. "Today is a new moon. Tomorrow I'll find another moon for you to put together." She hugged the rock, giggling. But Ben's eyes narrowed. He remembered standing over Fletcher last night, his hands shaking as memories of Ava flooded back. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he also knew that if it meant hope for Emma, a chance at better treatment, a brighter future, he couldn't turn away. That night, in the small apartment, he watched his daughter fall asleep, then stood before the window, the city lights shining on his face. He thought about the safe, about Madison Lane, about the man named Leonard with his sharp smile. And he knew, sooner or later, he would have to face them. Back on the 50th floor, Madison was still sitting in the dark office, only a desk lamp casting her shadow on the floor. In front of her was the safe, silent as a gatekeeper. In her mind, Leonard's sarcastic voice echoed constantly. But next to him in the drawer, Ben's paperclip still glowed. Strange. Madison touched it lightly. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. Maybe somewhere in this game she had found an unlikely ally. And perhaps an invisible man had just stepped out of the shadows to change her entire fate, that of the company, and that safe that had been silent for so many years. Outside, Manhattan was still bright, but inside her a new fire had been lit, a fire of determination. And somewhere in the darkness, Ben Carter was carrying that same fire for a different reason. A father's love. Neither of them knew it, but the paths they were about to take would tie their fates more tightly than ever. And the real enemy, Leonard Crane, had begun to make the first moves, not only to swallow Lane Dynamics, but also to bury the secrets locked in that safe forever. Night had fallen over Manhattan again, and the 50th floor of Lane Dynamics was bathed in a pale yellow light. Gone was the bustle of the day, only the hum of air conditioning and darkness around the glass walls. The huge safe still stood there, a block of metal that defied all effort. Madison sat at her desk, the desk lamp shining a harsh light on the documents, but her mind was not on the numbers. She waited, her hand unconsciously turned the paper clip in the drawer. The glass door opened slightly. The sound of the cart wheels rolling on the floor echoed steadily. Ben Carter walked in. He was not surprised to see Madison sitting there. For a moment their eyes met, as if the whole room had fallen silent. Ben paused, his hand tightening on the cart handle. He was used to quiet nights cleaning this room when it was empty. Today, the CEO was waiting for him. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," Madison said, her voice low, even, unhurried. Ben nodded, not answering. He just pushed the cart in, starting his work as usual, as if her presence had not changed the rhythm of his breathing. Madison watched, then slowly opened the drawer, pulled out the small object, and set it on the table. The light made it glint. "It's beautiful," she said. "You made it, didn't you?" Ben's hand paused. His eyes darkened. No denial, no nod. Just tense silence. Madison stood, slowly approaching. She picked up the tool, holding it out in front of her as proof. "This is no joke. This is the work of someone who understands mechanics, who knows every breath of a lock. The engineers I hired didn't see it, but you did. Why?" Finally, Ben raised his head. His deep brown eyes were calm but determined. "You shouldn't know." "But I did." Madison took a step forward, her voice sharper. "The drawing on the napkin. This tool. They both told me you weren't a janitor. You were an engineer. Or more." Ben was silent. In the golden light, his face was stone, but the tightness of his hands betrayed the undercurrent. Madison put down the tools, her voice low. "I don't care who you were in the past. I just know one thing. I need that safe opened, and only you can do it." The air was thick. Ben turned away as if to end the conversation. But Madison continued, this time not with the CEO's sharpness, but with the inescapable truth. "Leonard Crane is preparing to sell this empire to Titan Industrial. The board will vote on Friday. If I don't have the evidence to stop him, my father will be made a failure in the eyes of the world. Everything he built will be reduced to dust." Ben paused. His back tensed. Madison saw it, knew she had touched a nerve. "You didn't just draw on a piece of paper," she continued, her voice quiet. "You see the errors. You understand the structure. You have an ability no one else has. And I need it. I need you silence." Only the hum of the air conditioner. Then Ben turned, his eyes flashing with a different light. Not fear, but wariness, even anger. "You don't understand," he said slowly. "That world took everything from me. I left it behind. I just want a peaceful life." Madison recognized that look, a look of pain that had been suppressed for too long. She didn't ask further. Instead, she looked straight at him, her voice lowered, softer. "I saw your daughter at Family Day last month. She had a medical bracelet on her arm. I know you're here taking this job only because you need insurance. You want to give her a chance." Ben felt like someone had punched him in the chest. He stiffened, his eyes flashing with anger. "Don't drag her into this." "No, Ben." Madison shook her head, her voice determined. "It's because of her that you're in this. I don't promise things I can't keep, but I can get you and your daughter on the highest level of health insurance. All medical expenses, all trips to any hospital, anytime. Unlimited. Forever. The words fell into the void like a bell. Ben closed his eyes, trying to stop his heart from pounding. He remembered the nights Emma coughed, him sitting next to her, rubbing her back, helpless. He remembered the growing medical bills and the way her eyes lit up every time he brought home a piece of the moon he picked up on the street. Madison stepped closer, her gaze determined. "Help me open the safe. In return, I will help you open a future for your daughter." The silence stretched on. In Ben's eyes, pain, anger, and love mixed into a storm. Finally, he let out a long breath, his voice hoarse. "Only on one condition. I work alone at night when the building is empty. No one but you knows. No assistant, no security, no counsel. If that is broken, I disappear." Madison nodded immediately without hesitation. Agreed. Ben tightened his grip on the cart handle, his eyes dimming slightly. In that moment, he was no longer a janitor. He was a man caught between two worlds, a past of blood and fire, and a 7-year-old future. He knew he had just stepped back into a land he had sworn never to return to. Madison, watching him leave, understood. This deal was more than a safe. It was the beginning of a bargain with fate, where each person carries a wound and a fragile hope. Outside, the city is brightly lit, indifferent to what is happening in the closed room. But here, a contract has been signed with eyes, without papers, without a seal. A contract that can save the Lane Dynamics empire or destroy it all. And in silence, the giant safe still stands there, as if smiling. It knows the game has truly begun. That night, Manhattan shines like an upside-down galaxy. But on the 50th floor of Lane Dynamics, all the lights are off, except for a yellow desk lamp. The room is like an abandoned church, with the giant safe as a cold altar. Madison Lane stands silently by the window, watching the traffic below roll by. An indescribable feeling rises in her heart, hope mixed with fear. The door opens slightly. The familiar sound of trolley wheels rings, but this time it is different. There were more than just buckets and towels in the cart, but a heavy canvas tarp, a small metal box, and some tools that looked like they were made for mechanics. Ben Carter entered, not wearing his janitor's uniform. He wore a dark shirt, the sleeves rolled up, revealing the hard veins of his hands. Madison could tell by looking at him, this man was not a janitor tonight. He was back to his old self-engineer, craftsman, metal detector. "Do you need anything else?" Madison asked softly. "Quiet," Ben said shortly. His voice wasn't rude, but firm. She nodded, stepped back, and let him fight his own battle. Ben spread the tarp on the floor, placing each tool on it like a surgeon about to operate. Stethoscope, borescope, needle-thin drill bit, and tools he'd made from ordinary things, a paperclip, a polished metal bar. He knelt before the safe, his hand resting lightly on the cold steel. His eyes were dark, as if he were facing an old enemy. "You know," he said hoarsely, "the lock has a voice of its own. It doesn't fight you, it just tests your patience to understand it." Madison held her breath. She could see the transformation. The man who quietly mopped the floor every night was gone. Before her now stood an artist, a warrior, and a man possessed. Ben pressed the receiver to the safe. Tiny clicks, clicks, sounded in his ears like a faint heartbeat. He turned the dial in small increments, slowly, patiently. Madison watched his face tense, sweat rolling down his temples. Time seemed frozen. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. Suddenly he smiled slightly. The first tumbler is in the right groove. He wrote the number down on a piece of paper. His voice was soft, but his hands were still tense. Your father was clever. He added a false gate to confuse, but it didn't pass his ears. Trained in the furnace, Madison stepped closer, sitting on a low stool. She didn't understand the mechanics, but she was fascinated. It was the first time she'd seen such a fusion of human and metal. It felt less like a technical operation and more like a conversation. A soft click. Ben took a deep breath. The second one's done. He took out his phone, wiped the sweat, then paused, his gaze softening. Madison noticed the change in his eyes, a pain in the midst of his triumph. What's wrong? She asked. Ben looked at his palm where the paperclip had worn away. Ava, my wife, she used to say, the third tumbler is always a liar. He pretends to be right, but he's just waiting for you to slip up. His voice caught. I heard her again tonight. It sounded like she was sitting next to me, reminding me Madison was silent. In that moment, she saw that he was no longer a safecracker. He was a man who still conversed with the ghost of the woman he loved. She felt her heart constrict. Ben took a breath, steadied himself. He attached the boroscope and stuck the tiny lens into the narrow slot. The screen showed images of the mechanism inside darkness, metal glinting gears. He concentrated until the world disappeared. A soft pop sounded from inside the safe. Ben looked up, his eyes shining. That's right. The lie has been exposed. He turned the knob again. This time the sound was round and solid like a healthy heartbeat. He stepped back, removed the receiver, and leaned against the wall. His breathing was labored. Madison stepped forward. Can you open it? No. He shook his head. Only through 3 layers of protection. But, he pointed at the lock, it has a gravity mechanism with a time delay. I can't force it. I have to wait for it to release. Madison frowned. How long? Maybe hours. Maybe days. A lock like this. It's like it has a will of its own. It only opens when the right moment comes. The room fell silent. Madison looked at the safe, suddenly feeling like it was alive, deliberately prolonging the wait. Ben gathered up his tools, placing each one back in the metal box like a doctor after surgery. He had left behind a small tool, a polished hook pick, the handle worn from use. Madison picked it up and turned it over in her hands. It didn't feel like an inanimate tool. It felt like a memento, a memory. You left this, she called. Ben stopped, his back to her. A long moment passed before he said, No, I didn't. Keep it. Then he pulled the cart and left the room, disappearing behind the door. Madison stood there, holding the tool in her hands. She knew she had just been handed a piece of his past, even if it was just a small piece. And in that moment she realized this fight wasn't just about saving the company or preserving her father's legacy. It was also about helping a man open the final door to his own heart. The safe wasn't open, but tonight one truth was clear. Ben Carter wasn't just fighting metal. He was fighting the pain he had suppressed for 5 years. And in that struggle, Madison realized she was part of it. Outside, the city glowed brightly, indifferent to its own personal tragedy. But in this room, amid the yellow light and the faint sound of metal, 2 people, a CEO and a janitor, had begun to bond over something stronger than interests. memories, love, and a determination to fight the darkness. As the night drew to a close, Madison sat alone. She held the hook pick, its frayed handle. She knew the safe would open sooner or later. But more importantly, when it swung open, her and Ben's worlds would never be the same. The next morning, the 50th floor of Lane Dynamics was flooded with white light. But Madison Lane sat motionless at the table, her chin resting on her elbow, her eyes heavy from not sleeping all night. In front of her, Ben's hook pick glinted in the sunlight, small, simple, but heavy as a relic. She remembered his every move last night, listening, patient, sometimes as if he were conversing with a ghost. And the words echoed, "Ava, the third tumbler is always a liar." A name, a memory. Madison knew she had just caught a glimpse of a crack in Ben's cold facade. And there, the truth about the woman named Ava was firmly attached to the safe. Ian entered, holding a stack of papers. "Madison, breaking news. Leonard Crane called the press. He's going to be at an industry conference this afternoon, hinting that Lane Dynamics is about to change ownership. The stock is down 7% this morning." Madison frowned, her hands unconsciously tightening on the hook pick. Leonard was speeding up his game. She knew that once the rumor was planted in the media, if the board faltered, the company would fall into Titan Industrial's hands before she could turn things around. "Get me the internal archives from the past 10 years, she ordered. "Even projects that have been marked closed or canceled. I want them all." Ian hesitated. "That's the data locked in the archives, requiring 2 signatures from the board." Madison cut him off, her eyes as sharp as knives. "Then find a way to open it. If Leonard can hide it, I can find it." As Ian left, Madison turned back to the safe. For the first time, she looked at it as more than a challenge. It was like a door to the past, and on the other side might be the truth about Ava, someone she'd never met, but whose name made Ben shiver. At night, Ben returned, but the atmosphere was different this time. He walked in more slowly, his eyes heavy. Madison could tell right away. He'd been thinking about it since last night's brush with the past. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ben didn't answer right away. He put down the toolbox, sat silently for a moment before saying softly, "You know my wife's name." Madison nodded. "You mentioned it last night." Ava Ben's eyes flashed, old pain flaring up. "She was an engineer, the best I ever knew, before the explosion in the lab took everything." He paused, taking a deep breath. "This safe wasn't just your father's legacy. It was Ava's last work. She called it her mechanical baby, and He paused, his hands shaking slightly. "I swore I'd never touch it again." Madison fell silent. Her heart suddenly tightened. She understood now that every time Ben pressed his ear to cold steel, it was more than just the sound of mechanics. He was searching for his wife's voice. She placed her hand on the table, her voice slow but sure. "If that's true, then this safe is not meant to be forgotten. It's waiting for you. Ava didn't create it to be silent, but to be understood. Maybe I'm the only one who can open it." Ben looked at her for a long time, his brown eyes dark and swirling. He knew she was right, but he also knew that once it was opened, the past would no longer be buried. He turned away and opened the toolbox. His fingers touched each item as if searching for support. "Tonight, I'll try the lock's gravity." But he paused. You have to understand, once you open the safe, what's inside might not only save your company, it might also reveal the reason Ava died. Madison froze. His words were like a knife through his confidence. If the death had anything to do with Lane Dynamics and Leonard Crane, then this was no longer business. This was the truth that had been hidden for years. Ben got to work. He mounted the magnetometer to the steel door, inserted the probe into the narrow slot, and stared at the mobile screen displaying tiny vibration graphs. Madison sat behind him watching, her heart pounding. With each tick-tick sound from the machine, she tightened her grip. Ben barely blinked, his whole body as taut as a bowstring. More than an hour passed before he looked up, wiping sweat. The gravity lock has broken its cycle. It releases in about 36 hours. I need to be back at the right time. Madison nodded, but his eyes did not leave the safe, as if every minute he spent there was a conversation with his dead wife. Ben? Madison called softly. He turned back, his eyes still sad. I will not let Leonard hide the truth. If there's anything in the safe that proves Ava's death wasn't an accident, I'll release it. I promise. Ben stared at her. A CEO's promise meant nothing to him. But in Madison's eyes, he saw an unusual sincerity. Finally, he just nodded slightly, then packed up his tools. Before he left, he paused, his voice hoarse. If I disappear, remember, this safe can only be opened by someone who knows it from the inside. Not just any engineer can do it. Only me. And Ava. Then he disappeared behind the door, leaving Madison alone with the heavy truth. The next morning, the news broke. Leonard Crane appeared at a conference, hinting that Lane Dynamics would soon undergo a major change, implying Madison was incompetent. The media took the bait. The stock price dropped another 5%. In the office, Madison slammed the newspaper down on the table. Each line felt like a slap in the face. She knew Leonard wanted more than just the company. He wanted to destroy her reputation. She turned to the safe, her eyes blazing. It was more than her father's legacy now. It held the truth about Ava, the truth that could bring Leonard down. And to open it, she had only one way, to put her trust in Ben Carter. Madison gently squeezed the hook pick in her hand. It was no longer a lifeless tool. It was an invisible thread connecting two people from two worlds. And she wondered, when will this safe not only burst open the steel door, but also reveal a truth that would shake the entire Lane empire? Dynamics changed forever. On Tuesday night, Manhattan still glowed like a glowing vein. But on Madison Lane, time seemed to stand still. She sat alone in her 50th floor office, her eyes fixed on the giant safe. Tonight, according to Ben's calculations, the gravity mechanism would release. Tonight, the secret locked for 5 years could be revealed. The glass door swung open. Ben Carter entered, carrying the familiar metal box. But this time his face was no longer hidden. There was a determination in his eyes, as if he were prepared to face both darkness and light. "It's time," he said softly. Madison just nodded. She didn't dare to trust him completely, but she couldn't back down either. It all depended on the man in front of her. Ben spread the canvas sheet on the floor. The instruments were placed neatly like scalpels on the operating table again. He put on his stethoscope and sat down in front of the safe. His hands on the cold steel, his eyes closed. The room fell silent except for the sound of the air conditioner fan. 1 minute, 5 minutes. Then he turned the knob. The click sounded clearly different from the previous times. "Gravity has released," Ben whispered, his heart pounding. "The door is ready for the final step." Madison stepped closer, her heart pounding too. "Are you sure?" "Sure." He took a deep breath and pulled out the old hook pick, the one he'd left behind. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes burned. "This is the only tool familiar enough to work this lock. Ava and I designed it during sleepless nights. It won't betray me." He inserted the hook pick into the slot. There was a clicking sound, like bones slowly coming together. Madison held her breath. Her mind flashed with images of the council, Leonard Crane's mocking face, the plummeting stock. But most of all, she saw a man conversing with the memory of his dead wife, trying to complete a story. "Listen," Ben said softly, his voice trembling. "That metallic sound. That's what Ava used to say to me. A door never stays closed if the heart keeps beating." Madison's gaze softened. For the first time she felt love in this cold work. A click. They both held their breath. Ben turned again. The deep rumble, like the roar of a chained animal, filled the room. The safe door shook slightly. Ben pulled his hand back, sweat dripping onto the floor. He didn't dare turn it again. His heart felt like it was about to burst. This is it. Only the last bolt left. But he paused, his eyes on Madison. "Once it opens, we can't go back." "Are you ready?" Madison swallowed. "I've been ready since Leonard got his hands on my father's company." Ben nodded. He placed both hands on the heavy handle, closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Then he turned. The sound echoed through the room, steel sliding against steel, bolts pulling out of sockets. Each sound was like a heartbeat, each beat faster. Finally, a loud bang. The heavy safe door swung open, old metal steam pouring out like a trapped soul. It was dark inside, but the light from the desk lamp revealed a thick stack of files, a small wooden box, and on top, a cream-colored envelope. Madison and Ben saw it together. On the envelope, in soft handwriting, were 2 words: Ben Carter. The world froze. Ben reached out with a trembling hand and lifted the envelope. It was light, but it felt like the weight of the universe was on the paper. He bit his lip and tore the edge. Inside was a short letter, the familiar handwriting blurring his vision. "Dear Ben, if you're not here, believe me, I love you and Emma with all my heart. This safe is more than work. It's proof that what we built was never in vain. Keep going, don't let them take it all away. Ava." His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. Madison turned away, giving him a moment of privacy. But she knew this was more than a company affair. It was the return of a torn heart. Ben wiped his face, then opened the wooden box. Inside was a small seal engraved with a swallow, Ava's personal symbol. And at the bottom of the safe, files with a red stamp, "Safety Report, LC approved." Madison bent down, her heart clenched. "LC Leonard Crane, oh my God," Madison whispered. The documents read, "Substandard wiring, 3 warnings, all overruled by Leonard to save money." Ben gripped the edge of the safe, his hands shaking with anger. He knew. And he let Ava into the lab that day. The air was thick, as if the glass walls were about to shatter under the weight of the truth. Madison clenched the envelope in her hands, her eyes shining with determination. "Ben, this isn't just Ava's promise. This is a weapon. We're going to use it to take Leonard down." He looked at her, his breathing quickening. The pain in his brown eyes turned to fire. For the first time, he didn't back down. "Yes," he said, his voice steely. "Now it's our turn to lock him in his own safe." The room on the 50th floor still echoed with the metallic groan of the safe door opening. No one dared to call it an old souvenir anymore. It was like a window into time, open to both love and sin. Madison stood still, her eyes glued to the thick stack of files and the steel swallow seal Ava's memento. Her heart was pounding, both with fear and with unconcealed excitement. Beside her, Ben Carter was still sitting on the floor, his hands shaking as he held the letter, his eyes red. But there was no defeat in his gaze. Instead, there was something sharp and bright, a new determination. "You see," Ben said hoarsely, placing the letter in his breast pocket. "He knows." Leonard Crane ignored all warnings. Ava didn't die in an accident. She was killed by greed. Madison nodded, her hands tightening on the documents. "If that's true, what we have in our hands won't just save Lane Dynamics from Titan. It will destroy Leonard forever." Ben stood towering over her, facing her. "But if he goes public now, he'll deny it all. He has the media, the lawyers, the board. A letter and a few reports will be crushed in a whirlwind of propaganda." Madison was silent. She knew he was right. Leonard was a master manipulator of public opinion. If he hit him too hard, too soon, it would all go up in smoke. "So what do you think?" she asked, a searching gaze. Ben sighed, then pulled another file from the safe and flipped through it. "Look, this isn't just a one-off. Ava has notes on 3 other projects: a steel bridge in New Jersey, a power plant in Ohio, and a Boston subway. All have the same denominator: cost-cutting, cheap materials, ignoring engineer warnings." He looked up, his eyes bright as headlights in the night. "He's a repeat offender. If we find enough evidence, he won't be able to deny it." Madison moved closer, flipping through the pages. Ava's numbers, signatures, and handwritten notes were clearly visible. She felt goosebumps rise all over her body. This wasn't just an engineering file, it was an indictment. "What do we need next?" Madison asked. "The financial statements, the material purchase invoices, and the insurance reports. They're all in the filing system." "But I'm sure Leonard buried them," Ben said slowly. Madison smiled faintly. "He forgot something. I'm the CEO. I have deeper access than he thinks. If Leonard hid it, I'll get it out." Ben looked at her. In a flash, he saw that this woman was no longer the heiress Leonard had mocked. She was a fighter, willing to get her hands dirty to save the legacy. The next day, Lane Dynamics was like a broken beehive. Rumors of a Titan industrial takeover continued to spread. Departments whispered, shareholders were confused. Meanwhile, Leonard Crane was as calm as if he had won. He invited the press to take pictures of him in the main lobby, smiled brightly for the camera, and said half-openly, "Change always requires someone with the courage to lead." Madison stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down, her eyes cold. Beside her, Ian, her loyal assistant, fumbled. "Madison, the stock is down another 4% this morning. If this keeps up—" "Don't worry about the stock," Madison interrupted, her eyes never leaving Leonard. "Worried about Leonard. He doesn't know, but we have a knife in his back." Ian swallowed, not daring to ask more. He didn't understand everything, but he did know. For the first time since her father's death, Madison's eyes burned with fire. Madison and Ben met that night in his small apartment in Queens. Emma, 7, slept soundly on the sofa, her ventilator humming steadily. On the kitchen table, they spread out a stack of files from the safe. Yellow light fell down, illuminating their tense faces. "Are you sure these will be enough to take him down?" Madison asked, her voice low so as not to wake the girl. Ben shook his head. "No, it just shows his disregard for safety. But to finish him off, we need a financial connection. A receipt for cheap materials signed directly by Leonard. If we don't have one, he'll still blame his subordinates," Madison thought. Then her eyes flashed. "I remember my dad requiring hard copies of every contract over $1 million. He didn't trust digital data. If Ava left a copy, it would be in the basement archives where no one would touch it for years." Ben nodded. "We have to go down there." Tomorrow night they looked at each other. In the small apartment with Emma's steady breathing as a backdrop, a desperate plan took shape. The next night, the Lane Dynamics basement was dark. Madison unlocked the door with her CEO card, and the neon lights came on, illuminating hundreds of dusty filing cabinets. The space was cold, and the smell of old paper and rusted metal was thick. Ben stepped in, his eyes scanning the area. "This is Leonard's maze. But you forget, Ava once told me, if you want to hide something forever, put it where everyone thinks it's too obvious to find." They began to rummage through. Madison pulled open each drawer, files clattering. Ben searched like his wife, files marked with small symbols, a dot of ink, a folded corner. Finally, he stopped at a thick file tucked into the accessory costs folder. He pulled it out. The words "supplier contract, Crane approval" stood out on the cover. They opened it. Inside was an invoice for cheap wire from a shell company, clearly signed by Leonard Crane. Madison held her breath. This was the silver bullet they needed. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is what will bury him." Ben nodded, his eyes flashing. "And save Ava." Back on the 50th floor, they spread the files out on the large table. A map of the crime appeared, 3 projects, 4 missed alerts, an explosion that killed Ava, all signed by Leonard. Madison looked at the stack of papers, then at Ben. "The board will meet in an emergency session tomorrow. Leonard thinks he'll win the vote, but we'll let the board see it. Not through the media, not through rumors." Right there at the table, Ben folded his arms, his voice firm. "Then we don't just open the safe. We open the gates of justice." They were silent, only the clock ticking. A storm was brewing, and they knew when it hit, not just Leonard, but Lane Dynamics would never be the same. That morning, the 48th floor, the main conference room of Lane Dynamics, was ablaze with crystal light. The air was thick, like ice about to crack. Luxurious leather chairs were arranged in a circle around a long walnut table, and at the head of the table, Leonard Crane was already seated, adjusting his dark red silk tie, a sly half-smile on his face. He glanced around the room. Most of the board members were already leaning toward him. Rumors of Titan Industrial's imminent rescue were spreading fast, and the plummeting stock price had many people trembling. Leonard knew that with just a few more taps, Madison would be considered a failure. The door opened. Madison walked in. She wore a tight black suit, walked straight, and her eyes were sharp as knives. But today she was not alone. Beside her, Ben Carter strode. He was no longer in his janitor's uniform. He wore a dark suit that fit him well, his face cold, his deep brown eyes making the whole room pause. A wave of whispers arose. Who is he? Janitor, right? Why are you here? Leonard curled his lips and patted the table. Madison, this is a board meeting. It's not a place for you to bring guests. Madison didn't answer right away. She sat down in the chair opposite, her eyes looking straight at Leonard. Her voice was clear and decisive. This is a meeting to decide the future of Lane Dynamics, and no one has the right to hide the truth. Mr. Carter is here for the truth. The room fell silent. Leonard sneered. The truth? A janitor? Ben stood up and walked slowly forward. He didn't look at Leonard, but looked straight at the council. His voice was low and clear. My name is Ben Carter. 5 years ago, I was the chief engineer in the R&D department. My wife, Ava Carter, was also an engineer for this company. She died in a lab explosion, what Mr. Crane called a little accident. But today, I'm going to show you the truth. The air exploded. Shocked eyes turned to Leonard. Madison opened her briefcase and took out a thick file. Here are the documents Ava left behind, hidden in the safe my father locked. There are the ignored safety warnings and the contract signed by Leonard Crane himself approving the import of substandard materials. She placed each sheet of paper on the table, a loud pop sound. Each page was a knife cut. A silver-haired council member picked it up, shaking, reading it aloud. Substandard wiring, critical fire hazard. Signature, Leonard Crane. He looked up, his face pale. Leonard pounded the table, his voice snarling. Nonsense! This is a forgery! A farce you and this guy created to maintain power. Madison was undaunted. She held up another contract with its red ink still clearly printed. Forgery? Company seal, original signature. We have all 3 copies. If you want, I can have it audited right here. A wave of chatter broke out. Several members turned to each other, their expressions shifting from doubt to panic. Ben stepped forward, spreading out more technical drawings with Ava's notes. She warned me 3 times. Here's her handwriting. The lab is a time bomb. And the next day, the bomb exploded. Not fate. Not defiance. He paused, looking straight at the council. This isn't just my wife. This is a dedicated employee killed by greed. The room held its breath. Ben's voice was hoarse, but each word felt like it was hitting stone. Leonard jumped to his feet, his face red. Enough! This is a personal attack. He's not an engineer anymore. He's just an obsessed floor cleaner. Are you going to let a lunatic take over your company? Madison stood up, facing him head-on. He's right, Ben was a floor cleaner. But there's more. He heard the heartbeat of the safe that my $1 million engineering team couldn't open. He found the 0.02 millimeter error that the laser system missed. If you call that lunacy, then I want more of them in this company. The words cut like a knife. The room erupted in murmurs, this time directed at Madison. Leonard gasped, his eyes darting. He sensed the tide turning. Gentlemen, listen to me. Titan Industrial has made an offer. If we sign today, our shareholders will get an immediate return. If we believe these old pieces of paper, we will lose everything. Ben looked around, his voice low but resonant. If you sign, you will not only sell the company, you will sell its soul. The question is not how much Titan will pay. The question is, will you be responsible if one day the bridge collapses, the factory explodes, and your company name is associated with human blood? Silence fell. His words were like a funeral bell. A young board member tapped his pen on the table. Madison, if what you and Mr. Carter say is true, then this is not just a business matter. This is a criminal matter, Madison nodded, her voice firm, and I will not hide it. My father dreamed of Lane Dynamics as a safe place to build for people. I would rather this company collapse than let it become a cemetery. The sentence struck everyone in the heart. Leonard lost patience and roared, "Don't listen to him. I have the power. I have the votes. I call a vote now." But this time no one looked at him. All eyes were on the file on the table, the undeniable evidence. The acting president, an older woman with silver hair, slowly rose. Her voice was soft but firm. "We will vote. But not on Titan Industrial. On Leonard Crane." Leonard was stunned. "What?" "We vote you out," she enunciated, "as a danger to the company." The air exploded. Votes were quickly written. The results were cold, 9 in favor, 1 against. Leonard collapsed in his chair, his face pale. He stammered, "You will regret it. I will sue." But the security guard entered. The conference room door opened. Leonard was led away, his shoes dragging on the wooden floor. Each step was like a death knell. The conference room fell silent. Madison looked at Ben. For the first time in years, there was relief in her eyes. Ben's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the closing of a door to his memory. The conference room fell silent. Leonard Crane was led away, his shoes dragging a sharp sound on the wooden floor. The door closed, and with it, an era of lies at Lane Dynamics ended. Madison Lane stood in the middle of the empty room, taking a deep breath. She felt as if she had lifted a tower on her shoulders for years, and finally put it down. Beside her, Ben Carter packed up the files Ava had left behind. Her hand was shaking but steady. He didn't say a word, just nodded when their eyes met. In that moment, no words were needed. They both understood. The real battle had just begun, but from here on, they would go together. A few days later, Madison called a global press conference. Flashbulbs flashed, reporters jostled, shareholders sat silently in the front row. She stepped up to the podium, her voice low and clear. Lane Dynamics has gone through years of losing its way. Under the previous leadership, we allowed safety to be overlooked, people to be sacrificed for profit. Today, that ends. Leonard Crane has been fired. An independent investigation is underway. And from now on, our philosophy is just 3 words: safety first. The entire audience erupted in applause. But what moved Madison most was not the cheers, but the eyes of a little girl sitting in the guest seats. Emma Carter, Ben's daughter. The little girl smiled brightly, her eyes lighting up for the first time in months of darkness. The next month, Ben's life changed completely. He no longer held a mop in his hand, but walked into the R&D lab with a new badge, Director of Research and Innovation. The young engineers looked at him with respect, not just for his talent, but for the story he carried. He placed Ava's letter, the one found in the safe, under a glass frame on his desk. Every day before starting work, he gently touched the soft signature as a reminder: work with love, not for profit. Madison often came to the lab not just to check on his progress, but to listen to his explanations. She realized Ben was not just reinventing technology, he was reinventing the company's soul. Emma began a new treatment at Johns Hopkins. Modern machines, dedicated doctors. Madison used her power to ensure her baby had the highest insurance coverage. One morning, as Ben took his daughter to the hospital, Emma looked up and asked, "Daddy, is Ms. Madison the one who saved me?" Ben paused. He stroked her soft hair. "No, honey. You saved yourself by being strong. Ms. Madison showed me how not to give up." Emma smiled, then hugged her father's neck. Around the corner, Madison overheard, and her heart fluttered. There was no longer a gap between CEO and employee. This was family. 6 months later, Lane Dynamics announced the Ava Carter Foundation, a multi-million-dollar program for female engineering students, encouraging those like Ava to pursue their dreams. Madison and Ben stood on the same stage at the launch. As the red curtain fell, reporters captured the moment the two exchanged a long, grateful, trusting look. "She would be proud," Madison whispered. Ben nodded, his eyes distant, "and she would smile because we're not doing this just to get revenge, but to plant a seed." One autumn afternoon, Central Park was ablaze with golden leaves. Madison, Ben, and Emma were walking together. The girl was running and jumping, no longer breathless, her laughter echoing across the lake. Madison and Ben sat on a bench, silently admiring the view. He suddenly pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a worn hook pick. "You gave it to me that day," Ben said, his eyes fixed on the faded metal. "It doesn't just open the safe. It opens my life." Madison smiled slightly. "So what do you want to do with it now?" Ben turned to her, his eyes warm but firm. "I want to change the key, not to open the safe, to open your heart." She paused. The words were simple but so sincere that it took her breath away. Then in the bright afternoon light, Madison took his hand. "Ben Carter," she whispered, "let's open it together." No more closed doors. A year later, the wedding was not lavish, not ostentatious, just a small garden by the lake, a few close friends, Lane Dynamics employees, and the first Ava Carter scholarships handed out to young students. Emma threw flowers, ran toward Madison and her father, shouting, "New mom!" Laughter and applause. And in the corner of the garden, a small metal plaque gleamed. "The doors we open with love will never close." There are wounds that seem never to heal. There are doors that seem never to open. But in the end, the truth always finds its way, and love is always stronger than fear. Madison and Ben proved that justice can be delayed, but not buried. A hastily written letter, a small seal, and a father's patience changed an empire. From the darkness of loss, they built a light, not just for their company, but for their own family. And you who are listening to this story, you too may be standing before a door, a challenge, a pain, or a long-hidden dream. Remember, sometimes the key is not in the hands of others, but in your own courage. Any door can be opened if you dare to listen patiently and believe that behind it is something worthy. If this story has touched you, leave a comment, share your feelings, and remember to follow the channel so you don't miss other journeys. Because who knows, the next story we tell is yours.